All right, splendid. Here we go. Deryck, how are you, man? We are on and we are live.
I'm very good, Eddie. Absolutely delighted to be here joining you today.
Splendid. This is our second time. So, ladies and gentlemen, maybe watching this live or in the archive at a later date. We are currently toward the end of March 2022. It's an exciting time in the world, as usual. Deryck and I are at Checkpoint Software Technologies, attempting to keep the world safe online, I like to say. And this is our second time doing a show like this, right, Deryck? You're dialing in from Scotland today and me from New Jersey, United States.
Absolutely. Sunny Scotland end of March. It's a beautiful day.
Yeah, well, it's sunny New Jersey too. Yeah, everybody from New York always looks over the Hudson River at New Jersey and down their nose at us. It's all good. It's the Garden State. So
well, I think everyone always looks to Scotland anyway as to what a beautiful place to be. And if you get a nice day like it is today, it's fabulous up here.
Playland there, absolutely. I remember climbing Loch whatever when I was a kid in a pair of flip-flops, no less. I was one of those guys. All right, well, we're going to discuss the security report, ladies and gentlemen. I've got it on screen here, and I just want to let you know where to go to find this. We've got a dynamic version of the security report. If you can see the URL in the smaller writing there, it's go.checkpoint.com/security-report. And I might likely put it in the show notes as well as we're discussing it today. But let's hop in right to the table of contents. If you click in the top right-hand corner, and we were chatting before the show a little bit about supply chain attacks, Deryck. So I'm going to scroll through here and find some interesting news. But this is obviously an international affair, supply chain attacks. And it's something that I think, especially 2021, brought into the forefront of every major corporation's, the front of their mind. Because I think up until that point, people who weren't staying up to speed on cybersecurity attacks and knowledge just didn't know that, hey, one of my vendors can bring down my network.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wasn't surprised to see quite high up front. It's talking about a 650% increase in supply chain attack. Eddie, I mean, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. I had to manage supply chain attacks in my previous role in the NHS, and I expect in the Checkpoint community, I'll be working with some of our customers as well to, first of all, help prevent them, but we'll have to recover from them as well. It's not going away.
What were you saying? That you said you helped prevent them in your previous role? Is that what you said, or you had some?
When in the previous role, as you know, Eddie, in the previous role, I was the CIO for NHS in Scotland, and we had lots of organisations that joined up to become the NHS. So there's about 24 legal entities in Scotland that health was all demarcated down to these areas to provide them. And supply chain was one of our biggest risks within the NHS, and we actually got quite a severe supply chain attack. Similar to SolarWinds and similar to Kaseya, that actually managed to inject malicious code into one of our medical systems, and then the medical systems were obviously updated centrally from one of the repositories, and then we had to try and recover from that. So yeah, the job in the NHS was, first of all, trying to protect and prevent, but many times we're having to try and recover and bring systems back again.
I'd love to dissect that one a little bit as far as a story and, kind of get lessons learned from it. So let me know how much you are able to divulge. So where did the supply chain attack come from originally? Like, what was the partner, the technology that got into the network from the supply chain?
So I'm probably not going to tell you much more than what I said there, Eddie, other than it was one of our major suppliers.
Yeah.
And it was what I can tell you is, similar to most other supply chain attacks, there was an account that was compromised. So there was an account that actually hadn't been sitting there dormant for a while, hadn't been closed down, and they were able to actually get it and then get lateral movement, elevated privileges through the systems, etc. That's probably about as much as I can say, and that's what's in the public domain.
Good man. Well, then let's do this then. Let's theorize. So when there are accounts that, what do you mean by when there are, and let's just talk generically now, not about the NHS. When there are accounts that are left dormant, what do you actually mean? Are you talking about an Office 365 account or an Active Directory, or is it somebody with some other technology and they just left the username and password open, they didn't close down the account, and that was what got compromised?
Yeah, so in the NHS one I referred to, it was an active account that hadn't been used for a while, and it should have been closed down. What I would always say is a best practice is that any accounts that have got any link or potential link to elevated privileges or any potential lateral movement through the systems, why not set them to automatically become inactive after a small period of time. That small period could be as little as, say, 4 weeks. And then if you're doing that, if your processes are not as good as they should be, and in the NHS and Scotland, my processes weren't always 100% good. We strived for excellence, but sometimes we did miss things. Then you need to use things like the automation that can come in behind you. So in this particular example, if somebody leaves an organisation and your joiners, movers, leavers process doesn't close down all the accounts because it's not automated, you get Active Directory to actually have a look for any inactivity and actually close down. And that's the same no matter if it's sitting on-prem in an Active Directory or if you're using things like Azure Active Directory. It doesn't matter where it doesn't really matter where your identity and authentication is.
Tools that you're using to do that, or they come with the, let's say if it's Microsoft, it comes with Microsoft. That's great. Like every account, if there's inactivity over 4 weeks, although I'll tease coming from America that the Europeans might take 6 weeks vacations, so you might want to time it out at 6 weeks. Americans will 2 weeks and that's it, you're out of the company. But yeah, is that native to the application, or are there tools that will literally run through your system and scan for things like, not secrets, but scan for things like openings and dormant accounts?
Yeah, sure. So the identity and authentication tool sets that you're getting, so Active Directory and Azure Active Directory will let you set these things up. So you don't have to invest in expensive tool sets to do that. You can then use, if you're very good, you can use PowerShell to actually run and actually produce reports on your Active Directories, and that'll actually show you any systems that have got levels of inactivity, what the accounts are, what they're doing, etc. You can go and buy tools that you can sit on top of them, and these tools often will make things a bit easier for you. You don't have to get into the scripting and the PowerShell levels to do things, but you can do it natively without spending any money. And to be honest, if you go and do a bit of Googling, you'll probably find things. Although it's always a health warning: if you find things and get scripts, don't just run them on your systems. Have a good look at what the scripts are and what else you're downloading, etc.
Yeah. Well, now we're very much aware of malicious code being hidden within scripts and on GitHub, and so yeah, exactly to your point there. Okay, so that's interesting then, because if somebody's got an active account or an account that has a privilege but is not active, how are threat actors able to penetrate it? Because surely they still have to figure out the username and password of this, or maybe there's malicious intent by an insider. That's usually pretty rare. Would you agree? Insider threat is rarer?
Insider threat is rarer, although the capability for an insider threat, if there is someone malicious inside, that's often they'll do a lot more quicker damage than someone external. The threat external is still accounts that don't have multi-factor authentication, and you may be surprised to that, because it's how many years have we had multi-factor authentication? We've had 2FA for years. I've had authenticators running on my phones for years across all my systems, accounts. It doesn't matter what it is: Hotmails, Gmails, LinkedIn, corporate accounts. It's a standard, but that should be switched on. I'm sure Colonial Pipelines would have wished they'd two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication on their accounts when it got compromised. So, and then of course people reuse credentials as well. One thing's joining Checkpoint, the laptop I got enforces my corporate credentials. So if I try and use them elsewhere, and I've deliberately tried to use them any to see what it does. So I've gone on a website, thought, I'm going to use my Checkpoint email, I'm going to use my Checkpoint password and see what it does. And it stops you. It just comes up and says you can't reuse corporate credentials. And it goes further than that. It actually then logs that I attempted to do it with our SOC. And somebody will get in touch to say, what are you doing? Obviously, I was doing it just to actually do a bit of research and test it. But again, you can get automation that will stop it. But a lot of this does come down to what I think is common sense and good hygiene, which you can do to stop things.
Two brilliant. I'm going to turn the screen off, because two brilliant things. Multi-factor authentication. I want your opinion on, why is it people haven't taken that up, right? Why haven't we had a big uptake in that? It seems so simple. So we'll talk about that. But also, I love that feedback mechanism that you got from that Checkpoint experience, right? You tried to enter your username and password from corporate into some other site, and it triggers an education. That's what I've been trying to articulate to CISOs for a long time now. Is it's like we have this DLP product, and I remember years ago, it was on my very first tour of duty with Checkpoint. I sent an Excel file this is a long time ago now, to somebody or other. I think it was a trusted partner, but our DLP had kicked in, unbeknownst to me. I didn't get the memo, let's say, or didn't read it. And that document was held in quarantine with a bounce back saying, hey, Eddie, something along these lines. You've sent a document that is flagged as sensitive, whatever. Did you mean to do this? Yes, no. If you click yes, there was a little justification dialog box opened up with a link to our corporate policy. Now, I'd been with the company for probably 3 or 4 years at that point, and I thought I better read the corporate policy. Now, isn't that interesting? Watch my behavior in this, ladies and gentlemen, right? So I'm working at a security company. I likely read the policy at the very beginning, clicked I accept and moved on with my life, as everybody does, right? But you don't memorize the thing. It isn't really part of your DNA. But when I knew that Big Brother was watching, I've got an email in quarantine and this has been flagged as sensitive, I suddenly thought, okay, I better be sure. So I clicked the policy and I really went through it. That's after being with the company for 3 years. But it was a self-educating and then a self-remediating event, because then I could say, yes, I'm sure that this document is okay. It's going to a trusted third party. I own the liability for that, right? Obviously, we have to assume I'm not an insider threat. There are other technologies and tools to take care of that kind of a person, but I assume the responsibility of it. And then I clicked the button and then it just got released. So the end user was, none the wiser. Help desk didn't have 50 phone calls that day from frustrated users saying, I can't get my file out. And also the organization got a much more cyber aware hygiene kind of guy working at the organization. So that was, a similar experience, I think, for you. It triggers a phone call. Hey, what you doing? Just to remind you, obviously in your case, you were testing the systems, good for you. But if it's an employee that wasn't testing the systems and didn't know, well, now that person just got educated, which is beautiful. So that's my little anecdote for that part of the story. But let's move to multi-factor authentication, because like you, I've been using it for most of my stuff. I need to get my kids on it, mind you, now that you're saying that, for their social media. And that's important, even for things like TikTok and for Instagram, because if somebody takes over your kid's Instagram account, and posts pictures that are inappropriate, that's damaging, right? So we should have multi-factor authentication on things like your kids' TikTok account. But how much more, therefore, should we have it at companies? So what's the big reason, Deryck? I'm mystified. Why isn't every corporation and almost every citizen taking on multi-factor? It's free.
There's not a good reason for it, Eddie. It is absolutely as simple as that. You will struggle to find a modern day system nowadays that it's not fairly easy to switch multi-factor authentication on. The only part that I would say is probably slightly more difficult is if you rewind back to then say, okay, well, we want to do identity and authentication properly. So that's where you can make things slightly more complex. So it's when you're trying to do single sign-on pass-through authentication, tie that up into the multi-factor authentication so that end to end, everything's got the same standard of authentication with the same standard of logging and auditing and monitoring against it. That's more complex. But what I'd be saying is, okay, so there might be a small overhead in adding it on individually to systems, but if you're not in this joined up enterprise world where it's easy to add things on using Microsoft's identity services or Okta's identity services, then you can easily add it on just by using the Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator, and you know what? It works. It just works. Office 365 works out the box with the Microsoft Authenticator. Very little to do. What I found in Wood Mackenzie when we implemented it, that's where it was prior to the NHS, was you get a small amount of pushback from enterprise because they see it as another step. Yeah. So they do see it as another step, which is, and particularly if you implement it in a way where it's sending you, say, an email token or an SMS, and you're somewhere that you don't get the SMS through, or you're sitting in an airport and you don't get access to the email for some reason because you're in a place without Wi-Fi and not very much in the way of a 3G, 4G signal. So it's a slight overhead, but the authenticators are fantastic, and they're the way forward. But remember, of course, you got put an authenticator on your mobile device. You need to then think about, how am I protecting my mobile device, because you don't want someone to then compromise your mobile device that's got your authenticator running on it. So you need to be very careful about that. So thankfully as well, I've got all the checkpoint software on my mobile as well, so it does all the password credentials and checks everything on the mobile before the authenticator runs.
That's another one, mobile, that I think I'm still, sort of shouting from the rooftops to say, hey, come on, let's pay attention to securing our mobile devices. What's it like in Europe? Are people really uptaking on mobile security, or are they kind of looking at it as a nice to have? What are people thinking?
It's nice to have, and I don't understand that, Eddie. I think mobile should be a priority. It's nowadays we're offering through Gmail and Office 365 in particular an opportunity that makes it very easy to pull your corporate information onto your mobile devices, personal or corporate devices, and that's a great thing to have. People don't want to be walking around with multiple devices and their data sitting across everywhere. They want to go to one place, but there's then a corporate responsibility and a personal responsibility that says, if this is going onto a personal device, how am I making sure that data on the personal device is protected properly? If I'm downloading an app on my personal device, it could be Android or iPhone, how do I know if that malicious app might have access to some of the corporate information? So absolutely, you need to make sure, I would suggest, that you protect the email, your corporate mobile, BYOD mobile, exactly the same as your corporate endpoint device. I don't understand why that's not really proliferated in the same way as the corporate devices. I don't think it's cost, because protecting these mobile endpoints is very, very cheap and easy. And again, it tends to be click and play.
Yeah, I think that because they are personal devices, there's a barrier to people's perception that the corporation is touching my thing, right? So, whereas a lot of laptops are company issued, but as more and more companies do bring your own any device, including laptop, and give people, $200-300 every few years to buy a new Chromebook or whatever, I think people will start to get used to the fact that it's a shared device. The other part, I agree with you on the money. It's not very expensive to secure these things. I think the second thing that people's lack of attention on mobility is caused by is they're unknown, right, on mobile. In fact, we can probably look at that on our security report and get some actual statistics. I'll look at some mobility as you start chatting in a second.
And while we're doing that, Eddie, just add that the connecting your mobile up to an Exchange server, we've been doing it for years. I'm not sure how many years, but many years. And I remember the first time I connected up a personal device to an on-prem Exchange server to get my email, and it actually comes up and tells you. It comes up and tells you that by connecting to that device, you're giving your provider access to wipe your entire device. So that was something that people, maybe it's a bit back to your, you started at Checkpoint, and did you read all the T's and C's when you started? Nobody does. Chances are everybody probably clicked and went, do you know what? Yes, it's okay. Quite clearly, if my device is compromised or lost, I'm given permission to my company to wipe my entire device. That's not any different from today, protecting your mobile in the same way. In fact, I think it's actually slightly better, because all you're actually doing is you're actually saying, I'm going to give an organization access to wipe the corporate part of my device, and the rest of your device should be unaffected and untouched. So that's where my head is. Well, you bring the data.
Yeah, well, and then I think that the third thing, and this is I think the largest as to why people don't want to uptake, and it's the same with the MFA on mobile devices, is the convenience factor. Because as you say, it's a tough one. I mean, I get it. People want to have just one click and they're in, right? I understand that. And because of social media and Silicon Valley's brilliance in creating a user experience that is one click and you're in, there's an expectation in the corporate world that it will be the same way. So I think to solve for that, education, but I think it has to be built into the culture and the behavior of the organization. There are hoops people jump through to come to work. One of them is getting dressed in the morning. I mean, I know that sounds silly, but you don't turn up to work in flip-flops, right? You can work at home in flip-flops. So it's like this is my personal device. I can go to the beach in it with flip-flops, okay. But I go to the office wearing a shirt and tie. I mean, or wearing appropriate business attire. So that's a hoop, but it's a normal one. People are like, yeah, no, I accept that. I'd never fuss about that. Or, so I think we need to have the same attitude going in, but you can't just tell people. You have to, I think it's incumbent upon the cybersecurity team, the office of the CISO, to employ people who, as evangelist types, who are, let's say, not very, very technical, but would evangelize internally at a corporation, right? At one of our end users, for example, would evangelize, this is how we do it here. Here's your two-factor, right? Here's the mobile security. And so here are some statistics. So globally, okay, let's break this down a little bit. I hope people can see my screen here. It's a little small, but at the very beginning, we'll look at global trends, and then we'll go to Europe in a second. And these are trends showing the highest used method for attacking there. Now, botnets are at the very top. Ransomware is at the very bottom, and that surprises people. But what we mean by this is the most amount of attacks come through botnets, the least amount of attacks come through ransomware, but the most amount of money that is demanded from organizations and financial penalty from attacks is ransomware. So ransomware is the one that pulls in the biggest bills for people, but it's also a more sophisticated attack than botnets attacks or crypto miners. And so, cybercrime syndicates need to organize themselves to pull ransomware attacks together, which is why we see 8%. Now, mobile attacks, though, is almost double that, at 14%. So mobile phones are attacked out of the top six attack vectors. It is responsible for 14%. In Europe, Middle East, and Asia, it's responsible again 14%. And then, so reading from the top: botnets, info stealer, crypto miners, banking, mobile, and ransomware. So mobile's important enough to pay attention to.
And I expect that'll increase by about 50% next year. That's my expectation on mobiles. You'll start to see mobiles becoming more and more of a threat, and that's that's what we've seen across the last few years, even before I joined Checkpoint. Other thing, just to add to what you said earlier, Eddie, was how refreshing it would be if some of the big providers of SaaS and social networking, etc., would actually insist when you took up an account that 2FA was enabled, i.e. you couldn't use their systems unless they're secure, because that would change the whole mindset and education around how we're doing things. So it'd be less of something that people would think about deriving from a corporate world, and it'd be more, this is how you actually interact digitally. This is the standard that people should be doing at a minimum. And I guess there probably wouldn't be any of the big organizations watching this, but how refreshing it would be for them to say, do you know what? No, you take up a new account on Facebook and you can't switch it off. It's two-factor authentication.
Yeah, it would be a dream for us cyber people. The reality for a Facebook of this world is they would fear that a competitor would come and eat their lunch because they've just made their users jump through a couple of hoops. Facebook's the dominant player, mind you, so it would be tough. It would be lovely, wouldn't it, if somebody took the higher path and did that? But I think the almighty dollar, stops people from security second. And this is my advice to organizations that have, obviously most organizations have CISOs, but that want to take their cyber seriously, is the CISO and the CEO need to go toe to toe. It's like, I get it. Business is going to be first. Not at a company like Checkpoint, when we go security first and business second, and we proved it, right? We've proved very well that you can have a prevention. I use us, Deryck, whenever I'm talking to people about prevention versus detection, right? We are obviously a prevention first company. We drink our own Kool-Aid. And so the main argument, I feel, against prevention is, of course, the whole narrative on what we do with false positives. There's going to be a false positive. It's going to slow my business down to a crawl. It's going to be terrible. I'm not doing this. I'm going to do detection only. It's like, well, if it were true that false positives would slow your business down to a crawl and that you'll experience all of these false positives, then Checkpoint Software wouldn't be the 900-pound gorilla in our space. Right, we've been around 25 years. We started the network security industry, and they're in 88 countries today. With top line revenues as a publicly traded company of over $2 billion. So, it is possible. And what I always say to people is, it's not that we don't experience false positives. We do, and mildly regularly, whatever mildly regularly is, I don't know, once or twice a month. But we never experience, or rarely experience, the same false positive twice. And we minimize the impact, the business impact to that false positive. I would rather deal with that than let the threat actors in and then try to minimize the impact of malicious actors within your organization who could very quickly encrypt and steal and hurt your organization. So that's the philosophy. But we've been debating that one since the beginning of the industry, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anybody that's worked in the industry that's had to try and recover from any sort of incident, where it might be ransomware or it might just be a small amount of data loss, then it's the cost to do that is just, first of all, it doesn't take a few weeks. It always goes on for months and months and months, normally 18 months, into a few years, because what you end up having to do as well, Eddie, is that forces the narrative around from the board in particular to say, okay, so where potentially have we got any other weaknesses? What else should we be looking to shore up? So what they tend to do is they tend to then build a program around security at the same time as they're actually recovering from the incident. And the cost of doing that is substantially more times than it would be to actually try and implement proper security right at the start. The one thing I found reassuring on that when I was in the NHS, Eddie, that the narrative was changing slightly because of COVID. The way we were having to react and do things so quickly over COVID was that we weren't getting time to try and work out what we did with security at the end, because we're having to try and implement things in 6-8 week sprints. So the security actually became security done in an agile fashion right throughout the whole program. So it started off with the business case, and we looked at how we were doing security, how we were implementing it. So that was on things like contact tracing applications we were building, or it was on vaccine passports. So we were actually looking at the security right at the start, and then we were actually implementing security in an agile fashion all the way through. And that worked out, first of all, the right way of doing things, to do it upfront by design, but it also meant it was a much quicker and cost-effective way of doing it as well, which at the end of the day, all boards and stakeholders are looking to do. And if you can sell that argument, do it right and do it upfront, and it'll be so much cheaper, more cost-efficient, effective, allow you to actually bring all that information and data together. That's a powerful narrative, rather than we think we're okay, but if we get hit, then we've got a huge multi-million-pound bill to try and come along at the other end. It's not where you want to be.
Well, and this is, I think, probably one of our motivations for acquiring the company Spectral a few months ago, because the whole big shift left, DevSecOps, and making sure you've got security on the go. Do it reminds me of a conversation I had yesterday. I don't know if you've heard of these BISO roles in Europe yet, but the Business Information Security Officer. So not a CISO, but a BISO. And I was chatting with a friend of mine yesterday. Shout out to Brittany Oppenheimer. She's the BISO over at Cardinal Health, which is I think it's a Fortune 50 global company. And so they have these BISOs now, Deryck, so Business Information Security Officers. And really the role is this. The role is, it's many things, but one of the things I didn't realize it was, that Brittany explained to me yesterday, is how can we take security and use security as a business enabler? Now, she explained it at a previous life. She was at AMC Theatres. So AMC is a big theatre company, right? You go and you sit down and watch your movies, right? So she was the CISO over at AMC Theatre prior to this. And so AMC, what they wanted to do is they wanted to create a seamless experience for their customers. You can join the AMC club and go to like 10 movies a week, something like that, right? So you get an app and you're part of the club. And so then the person downloads their ticket from the app, and then they go to the person where you'd normally buy a ticket from, and you scan that ticket, and then you go through the experience. Well, what was interesting is, as a CISO, she was able to say, well, look, actually, we can give your customers, she's talking to the sales and marketing team at AMC Theatre, we can give your customers a better experience than that, because you're saying it's all in the app. Why are they even going to the ticket person to scan some QR code or whatever it is to get in the door? Surely we can authenticate, people going in through the door without having them being scanned by setting up these little, and she set up the system. So all of a sudden, security became a business enabler. It became something that helped the customer journey at AMC. In other words, get more revenue. So that, to me, is, I think, where we need to go in the security industry now, is we're going to start to say, okay, security first, and yet at the same time, how can security enhance the business experience for people, right?
I totally agree with that. For the last 6 years, that's exactly what I've been talking about. It's an enabler, but I did a presentation 2 weeks ago, and it was talking about security as a method of business acceleration. So accelerating change, accelerating transformation, accelerating growth, shareholder value, and that's exactly what security has come. It's moved from the world of perimeters and blocking and saying no and making it difficult. It's moved to that world of saying you get the expertise involved right at the time where you're doing concepts, business cases, where you're trying to work out where you're taking the business, and then it should sit there and it should enable you to do things much quicker and much more secure and safer. And as I said earlier, if you do that right up front at the right point, then your user journey is going to be much better, and you're going to be doing it in a much more cost-effective way. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I think our industry is maturing. It's time for these kinds of conversations. I've also seen this a lot more. It's beautiful to see the CISO move out from underneath the technical organization, the CIO, and start to report to CEOs as a separate entity. And I think also having physical security report up through the CISO. So now you've got security in one place. You know, CIOs, and as a former CIO, it's a little bit tough because, you know, it's a technical role, but really the CISO's role is it's a risk management role. I think it'd almost be aligned a tiny bit, a dotted line in a sort of way, to the general counsel, because general counsel deals in business risk. The CISO deals in business risk. The CIO deals with technology. Do you think I got that right as far as, you know, where we're going to see the maturity of our industry?
Nearly right. Yeah.
Okay,
I
go
think
on.
I think that's maybe slightly simplified. I've always looked at the CIO as not just somebody that's dealing with the technology. The CIO for me was the top level executive that was driving forward business transformation and change. And that's what the CIO was there to do. My role in the NHS was very much that joint role. So I also adopted the CISO role. So I was sitting there speaking to the board about the digital acceleration, the transformation, what we needed to do, but also balancing that by making them aware that, and by the way, the security stuff's all in hand for this. You know, there is no risk. Now, the language I talked when I talked security to the board, it was risk language. So it was different from the CIO. The CIO language would be around the transformation, how we're doing it, what success looks like, how we're going to be driving forward a different type of organization from what it is through the use of digital technologies. It could be disruptive, innovative, etc. Then when I put my CISO hat on, the CISO hat was very much talking about cyber risk, how we were managing, how we were basically through a risk managed approach, we're going to be able to, in many ways, accept some of the risk. What I talk about as well, ID, is maximizing risk. Risk isn't something that you always want to minimize. Risk can be a great opportunity driver to do things differently. And that's what I'd always do as a CISO. As far as where they report into, I don't think it really matters. I think the critical thing is that, one, you need to make sure you've got a board, a chief executive or a president that understands the cyber landscape and understands that technology landscape. So they need to be the evangelist as well, so that when you're having these conversations, you can have these direct conversations and the conversations get sponsored somewhere. If you're sitting on a board, you can do it yourself. That's absolutely great. I was passionate about it and I never had a problem getting investment for my cyber programs. It was always something that I managed to do. However, you can still do it through a more traditional type structure, I think, but the key thing is you need to make sure that you're able to influence at the right level. And it might be just influence through, it could be a CIO, or it could be a chief data officer, or it could be a chief risk officer as well that you're trying to influence through. The key thing is that, do the board understand it? Do they understand what you're doing? Can you start to give them assurance, and can you start to try and give them some data and metrics? If you want investment that shows this is what we want an investment for, and this is how you get your return on investment. And the return on investment is something that I find that CISOs don't talk about enough, and they should do on the board. It shouldn't just be getting investment to actually bring in cyber programs. It should be saying, okay, what are we doing with this? How are we able to know that this is the right investment? This is actually helping to actually modernize and drive change within the organization. And you need to be prepared to stand up and demonstrate that.
So how much conversation is at the board with the also the CEO for the disaster recovery plan? Is that something that's table-topped on a regular basis?
Well, it's something that's owned on a board. There'll be the board alone, normally a corporate risk register. I don't know if that's just a UK term, if that translates worldwide, but the board needs to understand the key corporate risks, and part of that corporate risk, there's no doubt, will have cyber risks sitting upon it. And part of the cyber risk mitigation response will be understanding what they do around things like disaster recovery, etc., and how we're actually able to actually manage forward in the event that we've got something. So I expect that the chief executive or the chair of a board or a president will get a level of assurance as to where we are around issues connecting with the resilience of having an issue or having an event, but without necessarily being involved in that. When I was at the previous organisation to the NHS, it was through the parent company's risk group that we did our exercises looking at disaster recovery. So it was reported up through that channel, then it reported up into the overall group board. And so at the risk level, they fully understood what we were doing, because that's where they were doing the audits and having a look at how we were recovering and where we were. And then the board was asking these standard board questions around the risk and have you covered this? What does this actually mean? What does this actually mean in real terms? So I think it's the board being able to actually have a conversation at a level that gives them a level of assurance, but there needs to be that structure underneath.
How often did the board do that at that organisation?
Twice a year.
Is that enough? I mean, as far as truly, I mean, to me, it's kind of like, doing fire drills. If you did them regularly, once a month, let's say, you really know where the fire escapes are. But in our New York office, for example, and I was probably away for the annual, because I know they're done annually, but once a year, if you'd ask me right now, where's the fire escape? I don't know.
It's a lot. So normally when you're doing these exercises, Eddie, there'll be, so when I said twice a year, so that was the assurance the board would get. But then underneath, when we're actually doing the exercising, you'd be exercising different elements on a monthly basis. Yeah. So it would be, it'd be, in effect, it was pretty much done all the time. So okay. certain times you would have to take certain systems down and fail over the systems. That could have been rebuilding them from infrastructure as code in the cloud, or it could have been actually bringing, believe it or not, in the day, bringing hardware in and actually putting systems back on that hardware, which was a world that we used to live in as well. So wow. It could have been through that, or it could have just been small exercises to do with failing over Active Directories, domain controllers, or doing SQL failovers, etc. So there was different levels, but it's still all fed up to the overall report that would actually show the level of cyber risk, which was exactly what the important thing was.
Right. Beautiful. Okay, man. Well, I think we should wrap right there. That's wonderful. So stay right there as I bail out. Good stuff. If anybody's watching this in the archive, you can reach us. I'm easy to find. So Edwin Eddie Doyle, Manhattan, boom, in LinkedIn. I'm the first one that comes up. What about you, Deryck? Where can people find you?
Eddie, I don't mind saying it, I'm absolutely unique. When you look at the spelling on there, you'll only find one of me. If you go Googling, you'll find my LinkedIn, and it's pretty easy to find me from there. So that's the great thing with having this really strange first name that my mum and dad gave me, that I believe is from Holland, the Netherlands, and Mitchelson as well. So easy to find.
Well, and my first name Edwin, which is Welsh, and I've not got a drop of Welsh blood in me. And my last name Doyle, I've probably got some Irish, but I'm French mother. And so for having a silly name as a kid is now very beneficial. So thank you so much, Deryck. We'll get you back maybe later in the year or next year. This was really cool. Much appreciated, ladies and gentlemen. Be safe online.